Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and as you know, national security and foreign affairs are very important to us over here. They don't get a whole lot of headlines. People talk about it, when there's bombs going off or when there's tanks rolling through a foreign country, but we should be talking about it on a daily basis to make sure that the United States military stays ready for whatever might come our way. If there's anything we've learned over the last 20 years, you can't predict what might come our way. And we're going to discuss many of those things with our next guest. He knows what he's talking about. He's Robert Wilkie. He was the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs and also the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Secretary Wilkie, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to see you again, Larry.
Well, a major problem in our country right now, according to the Pentagon, it's not my observation, it's just a fact, that we have a very huge recruitment problem right now. We are missing the mark across every branch of the military. What do you make of that? What do you think is the cause?
Well, I think a couple of things. I do think it accelerated after the disaster in Afghanistan. I certainly saw that in places around the country where, military service is automatic in the thinking of most people, and that's in that part of our country that runs from Virginia to Texas. I also think that in those areas that are most fruitful for military recruitment, I'll give you an example. 60% of the officers in the four services come from 11 states, Virginia to Texas. I think people have seen, in spite of what the Secretary of the Army said last week, that the military is being now divided into racial, ethnic, and sexual categories. And people are being forced to do things that the military has never forced them to do. And we're seeing that play out in all aspects. And one last thing, the same Secretary of the Army who said that only the right wing talks about wokeness in the military. This is the same Secretary of the Army who went down to Fort Bragg, and instead of talking about the readiness of the All-American Division or Special Operations Command, said that Fort Bragg is leading the world in fighting climate change.
Yeah.
And in that, she joined her other two service secretaries who say that their number one priority is climate change. So it is not focusing on America and America's enemy.
Well, Secretary Wilkie, you seem to have a good handle on how I go about my business because you walked right into my next line of questioning, and that has to do with Secretary of the Army Christine Wormuth. I want to quote her verbatim. She said, there is a drip of criticism about a woke military, and it's having some counterproductive efforts on recruiting. In other words, she doesn't think it's the woke nature of what's coming out of the Pentagon and the fact that the military is being told that climate change is their number one enemy and that they need to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion and transgender policies and who's sleeping in what barracks and bathrooms and all that. No. It's Republican lawmakers criticizing or calling into question whether those policies are hurting readiness. It's the Republican lawmakers who are making the difference. That's a blatantly political argument, and there's no basis for it.
Well, there is no basis for it, and all she has to do is repeat the words of the Chief of Staff, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who, in that infamous appearance before the House Armed Services Committee, read off of Black Lives Matter talking points. She can look at the United States Military Academy, where now you can substitute courses on military history, American military history, world military history, for courses on sex and civilization and ethnic diversity. You could say the same thing about the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy.
And I don't think it was Republican senators or congressmen who compelled the Air Force to have a drag queen performance on a base in Nevada. It only got canceled because Republican lawmakers draw attention to it.
That's right. Can you imagine if I, as the Undersecretary of Defense under General Mattis, had said, yeah, it's all right to have strip shows on naval bases?
Right. Yeah. Well, you would have been very popular with the troops,
right,
Secretary.
Right. Yeah. Elizabeth Warren would have been coming out of the wall.
Probably.
And camped in a tent on the Pentagon lawn. So we now have, Larry, a Secretary of the Air Force who says that race is now going to be considered in promotion and assignments. We just had a Pride event where a 3-star Air Force general said that her decisions on promotion and assignment have to do with whether or not she believes in the efficacy of the state laws at which her troops or airmen will be stationed.
In fact, hold that thought, Secretary Wilkie, because again, you're anticipating where I'm going. We've got the video. This is a general For the Space Force, I believe, let's take a look.
Transformational cultural change requires leadership from the top, and we do not have time to wait. Since January of this year, more than 400 anti-LGBTQ+ laws have been introduced at the state level. That number is rising and demonstrates a trend that could be dangerous for service members, their families, and the readiness of the force as a whole. When I look at potential candidates, say for squadron command, I strive to match the right person to the right job. I consider their job performance and relevant experience first. However, I also look at their personal circumstances, and their family is also an important factor. If a good match for a job does not feel safe being themselves and performing at their highest potential at a given location, or if their family could be denied critical health care due to the laws in that state, I am compelled to consider a different candidate and perhaps less qualified.
That's Lieutenant General Deanna Burt. She's the Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Cyber and Nuclear United States Space Force. First of all, that's her admitting that she discriminates based on job placement depending on the state and the sexual situation in officer's home. But secondly, I'm old enough to remember that an officer in uniform is not supposed to dabble into obvious partisan political discussions like that. I mean,
Absolutely.
Would that have gone over in, as you mentioned, Secretary Mattis's Pentagon?
General Mattis would have dismissed that individual. And I think, Larry, we have gone a long way from the great George C. Marshall, and his biographies are sitting behind me here, who said, "I serve only the Republic," to General Milley making the statements that he's making, and now this general openly criticizing the laws of the individual states and promoting a political agenda. The tradition of the United States, unlike Europe, unlike South America, has been that the military is apolitical. It does not discuss these things. And now we see this infecting every level of the force, from pronoun indoctrination to, as I said earlier, the Secretary of the Air Force saying that race is now to be considered. And then when you hear your familiarity with the Naval Academy, the former superintendent actually saying that the United States is not a worthy nation, that we need to swear to fight against ableism, whatever that means, sexism, racism, et cetera, et cetera. And these naval cadets, midshipmen, are now taking oaths along those lines. And the sad thing is that these people do not understand the beauty of the military. I've spent my life in it. I was born in khaki diapers. The military is the great leveler in society. If you perform, you are accepted. It doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like. And the other side is that the United States Armed Forces, and you know this from personal experience, looks more like America than any other industry, any other force, any other business in this country.
Yeah.
And to me, it is an incredibly sad day, and it is dangerous for this nation.
Well said, sir. Robert Wilkie is the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and in a moment we're going to continue our conversation. What is the state of affairs for our veterans in this country under President Biden? And also all this readiness, it's a problem if we actually have a conflict, and there's a lot of conflicts in this world. We'll get to it next on O'Connor Tonight.